My belief is that if you can't get your expectations in line and enjoy your golf, you have no chance of getting better. And I fought against this for many, many years. I was a miserable player. I would look at my rounds as like this litmus test. Like, I'm either going to score well, and if I don't, I'm not having a good time. And that's a horrible way to play this game and to enjoy this game.
All right, I am excited about this one because I've been digging into this book, The 4 Foundations of Golf, and we've got the author here, Jon Sherman, on the show. Jon, super excited to have you here. Appreciate you coming on the show.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate you getting the book, digging into it. I know it's long, but hopefully we'll cover 1 or 2 nuggets from it today. So appreciate the opportunity.
Absolutely. There's no way we're going to cover all this today, but I tell you, it's one of those ones you pick it up. And look, I've read countless books. I've watched a lot of instruction on YouTube. And there's a lot of good stuff out there, but I think you've got a very refreshing take here. And I think it's largely because as somebody who's just an amateur golfer, I'm not getting paid to play golf. I think being able to realize that I can score better without having to change too much with my swing is something that's always going to spark my interest. So before we dive into some of the concepts, let's start with a little bit of background on yourself. So you've got the book, you've got the website Practical Golf, the podcast, and you refer to yourself as a player coach. So can you tell us a little bit about what that is and what your kind of unique take is on helping golfers?
Sure. So to briefly explain, I guess, how I'm different than the rest of the golfing world is, about 9-ish years ago, I got an idea that I could offer different / better online golf advice. I was a decent junior player, didn't play much in my 20s and got back into golf when I was around 30 and got very good quickly again. And I started to unravel a lot of the mistakes I made when I was younger. And I felt that I had something to offer from a player's perspective. I think, growing up and then watching how the online golf world had evolved, it was all about the technical elements of the golf swing. And that every golfer thought, well, if I need to get better, I need to focus on my technique. And I felt there was a bit of an overdose of that. Not that there's not great information out there. There's plenty of awesome swing instructors on YouTube. I'm friends with a lot of them, but I just felt, well, there's a lot of other stuff that I've gotten better at and learned that I can share with people. And I wrote a lot for years on my website, Practical Golf. And eventually a lot of those ideas turned into the book, which I released about 1.5 years ago. And essentially what I try and do is I communicate from a player's perspective on essentially 4 main topics: expectation management, strategy, how to practice effectively, and my version of the mental game. And yeah, that's my perspective. I'm a golfer. I can play at a pretty high level. And my handicap is a +2 right now. I just got finished playing at the US Mid-Am. And to be quite honest with you, that was literally impossible for me to even conceive of a decade ago. So I've gotten my game to a place where I figured out some stuff. I've learned a lot from other people, and I try and communicate all these mini lessons to golfers of all levels to mainly make them happier. Most importantly, I want everyone to be happy and enjoy their golf, because I didn't for a long time. And my second rallying call is I want to lower your handicap too. So that's what I try and do with my own kind of different way of explaining things.
Well, and I like that you say that, because I think one of my big takeaways from the book is that it's very versatile in the different levels and different parts of the journey where golfers can relate to this, because your better golfers who are looking to win some more tournaments, I think, can pull some stuff from this. But more importantly, like the golfers like myself, I feel like we are 98% of the golfing population, which we're just out there to have some fun. But The reality is, somewhere along the way, we do tie our performance to fun. I think about,
yes,
right? I mean, we just like, we start off, we're just like, hey, we get our hooks, and our hooks get into the game because it's so much fun. But then we start to take it more seriously, and we start to get a little bit harder on ourselves. Where I see that even for myself is, I put a lot of emotional eggs into my basket when I have like a golf trip planned. Maybe once a year I get away with like my friends for like 4 or 5 days to play golf, and we'll stack 6-7 rounds. And I get nervous about how I'm going to play. And if I don't play well, I start to get frustrated. And I worry, like, what am I really out here for? I'm out here to enjoy the game. And you've got a kind of a unique take on this, on your kind of this happiness equation. And I think it definitely relieved a little bit of that burden for me. So I wanted you to share a little bit of your take on that.
Yeah, I think, now that the book's been out for a while and I've gotten a lot of feedback, I think the first section, the expectation management section and the happiness equation is part of that. That's where I think it's had the most profound effect on people, because my belief is that if you can't get your expectations in line and enjoy your golf, you have no chance of getting better. And I fought against this for many, many years. I was a miserable player where I would look at my rounds as like this litmus test. Like, I'm either going to score well, and if I don't, I'm not having a good time. And that's a horrible way to play this game and to enjoy this game. And whether you're looking forward to your round all week when you're at work and you're like, I'm playing Saturday morning with my buddies, I want to beat them, or like you said, you have a trip coming up. Unfortunately, what we do is we kind of build this like, reality, or this story we want to live up to. And when we get on the golf course, things are obviously a lot messier than that. They never go according to plan. And I think a lot of players struggle when it starts deviating from that kind of fantasy we had. And then you're left with the reality of golf, which is this highly variable, frustrating, and things can change on a dime type of game. And that's where we get upset and frustrated. So, one of the things that I try and help everyone achieve in their happiness equation, and it's different for every golfer, is that can we line up our expectations to our skill level and preparation? Because I believe we're at our worst when they're totally out of whack. So for me, for example, in my 20s, I was a decent junior golfer. I didn't play much in my 20s. I lived in New York City, but I thought, I can go out there and shoot a 75 still. And the second I felt that score slipping away, I would lose my mind, because my expectations were way out of line with my current skill level. I wasn't playing much. I wasn't practicing much. Therefore, I was not entitled to those scores. And for years, I essentially fought against myself and didn't really enjoy golf because of that. That equation was so out of balance. And I try and get every golfer to reflect on this, because everyone's situation is different. Some people can only play once a month. Some people get to play 4 times a week. We have work obligations. We have family obligations. The budget might not be there. So I get everyone to look at their situation and reflect on it and say, can we take a step back and think about what we want out of this game? And more importantly, when we get on the course, when we're in the heat of the battle, can you take a second to like take a deep breath and being like, okay, I am out here for fun. I just made a triple bogey. That happened. Okay. The day's not shot. I'm still out here with my buddies. It's beautiful out. Can we make sure that at the minimum, we're going to enjoy the experience and be grateful that we get to play? So I find a lot of different ways to explain these concepts to people, whether it's my own personal stories of embarrassment, sharing statistics of shot outcomes and handicap levels. But I think this is legitimately the most important part of the game to get right, because nothing else will work if you don't manage your expectations properly.
Yeah, and I think as I was digging into the book and I'm saying, okay, so that had a comfort level there of saying I can still be out there and have fun. I'm not winning or losing any money in this round. That doesn't matter. But I think for me, that what started to really validate that statement was when you started to break down specifically certain things, certain parts of the game that set expectations of, and made me realize why my expectations were not properly aligned. One perfect example of that, and I want to have you expand on it here, talking about how watching the PGA Tour and broadcast golf specifically kind of sets you up for failure when it comes to expectations. And what I mean by that is I'm the type of guy where I have a hot streak and I'm playing pretty well, and I'm shooting high 70 scores and I'm thinking, fantastic. And then out of nowhere, I'll shoot a score in the 90s. And what ultimately happens with that is I start second guessing that I never deserved to shoot those 70 scores in the first place.
The demon showing up.
Yep. I start looking online for what I can change or what I can do and all this stuff, because I think of that pendulum swinging so far made me feel like this just shouldn't be right. You shouldn't have this much variability in a sport. But you talk about it, how on Sunday at the PGA Tour, we only see the guys who made the cut. We only see the guys who are playing the very best that week, and we're only seeing the best shots from the best guys. So take us through that a little bit, because I feel like our listeners can hopefully benefit from that as much as I did. The reality of the variability of scores in this game, and what is truly acceptable.
Yeah, I think, my belief is that, most avid golfers are going to watch professional golf on TV. It's just what we do. It's exciting to watch the best in the world compete. And unfortunately, the way the broadcasts are set up is that they are presenting a version of golf that technically doesn't even exist. And we kind of watch this, and I've been watching since I'm, 8 years old. I'm 40 now, so that's many years. Mm-hmm. And I think it's largely, I don't say it's completely responsible for mismanaged expectations, but I think it's a big part of it because, as you said, the broadcasts are there to entertain us, and we're left with kind of like this confirmation bias of every week, 150, 170 players are teeing it up, and we're going to be shown the best shots in Thursday and Friday rounds. Go look on the PGA Tour or any other tour, LPGA Tour. I don't care what professional tour. Go look at every single leaderboard at the bottom. You're going to see a lot of 78s, 79s, 76s. These are +7, +8 handicaps. I mean, they're just ungodly good. But we're not being shown that. We're being shown a highlight reel, the 25 footers going in, the escape shots out of the trees, these miraculous short game shots, perfect drives. And then eventually, as the tournament winds down, we're going to be focusing on those 10 players who are playing the best. So I actually think a great exercise now is watching like ESPN Plus or the PGA Tour live coverage. If you get to watch a featured group on like Thursday and you watch someone shoot like a 77 or something, you can see them struggling. Like they're not hitting a lot of errant drives. They're spending a lot of time in the rough. They're three putting. It's not the same version of golf we're seeing on TV. And to get to your point about you shooting in the high 70s and 90s, that is a very normal range of scores. And I think golfers at your level are often the most tortured because they can taste the mountaintop of shooting the 70s, but they're also going to shoot in the 90s too. The mid handicap, the mid single digit handicap, I actually think is the most tortured golfer in my opinion, because they're stuck between these two worlds, so to speak. But again, look at a PGA Tour player I put in the book. I think it was Richie Wawrinski. You look at just some random guy, 120th in the world, made $2 million, whatever he is. He's going to have some 63s, some 64s. He's also going to have some 78s, 80s, and 81s. He had a round, I think, he went 65 and then in the high 70s. The game is just as mystifying to them, and if you listen to their post-round interviews, they get just as shocked too. You'd be like, I played yesterday, I was lights out. Today I had no clue what I was doing. These are the best in the world. So for the rest of us, I think we need to think a little bit more critically about what's going on at the professional level and understand that if you're watching on TV, it's not educational, it's entertainment purposes. Do not take your cues from what you're seeing, because it is real in the sense that they are hitting the shots, but they have hundreds of balls to choose from that are in the air, and the producers are just popping around to all the good ones usually. And I think it does a lot of damage to, the level or the version of golf that people aspire to, because it doesn't exist.
Yeah, and I think when it was seeing those hard numbers in the book in front of me is what really clicked. When I thought, wait a minute, if a PGA Tour player can shoot 63, one day and then maybe shoot 83 and miss the cut, that's a 20-shot swing. That's exactly
everyone's
what I'm
got a 20
with.
shots. Yeah, everyone's got a 20, 30, 40 shot swing, no question.
I just love that because I think it gives us takes a little bit of that weight off our shoulders to say, hey, when the bad rounds happen, instead of doing what I do and using that as the wormhole to then, invalidate my other strides in the game, that's an important takeaway for me. So I'm glad we got to talk about it. The other one that I wanted to chat about, because this is honestly how I first discovered your content. It was actually on Instagram. And it was you explaining the 2/3 rule. And the 2/3 rule was the reason I went out and got this book. Because I'm like, wait, this is something I've heard a lot of golf explain. I've been doing a golf podcast for almost 10 years. I've heard a lot of golf explained. I've never heard this interesting take on it. So I want to have you explain the 2/3 rule. Because again, I think this also helps dispel a certain degree of what we see on tour versus what we believe. Because for me, I always think if a guy's winning or something, they're firing on all cylinders. Every part of their game is working. But then I think, I've been a longtime Tiger Woods fan. I remember the interviews of Tiger always finding a way to win even when he didn't have his best stuff. So I think it kind of relates to this. So can you take us through that 2/3 rule and what it means?
Sure. So it's funny. The 7 or 8 years of writing articles and tweets and podcasting leading up to the book, I came up with all these ideas. And this was one of my earliest articles. I think it was in 2016 I wrote it. And for whatever reason, it just resonated with people. And obviously I put it in the book. And it's like you mentioned, it's one of the concepts that people came away with. And they're like, oh, that was helpful. So long story short, I've gotten to a pretty good level of golf, and I've been around a lot of great golfers, and I'm going to exclude tour players from this for a second. I've been able to compete I just competed in one of the top amateur tournaments in the world around some great golfers. I still have never seen someone do everything perfectly and shoot a great score. And what I mean by that is I divide the game up into 3 phases for simplicity: tee shots, approach shots, and anything that's incurring inside of 100 yards. So that could be obviously wedges and putting. I don't think I've seen people shoot 63s, 64s. I shot a couple of 64s the other year. I've never seen anyone do all 3 phases of the game above average, meaning they're firing on all cylinders. The best I've seen is 2 out of 3 going really well, and then managing the other part that was kind of like not as great. So last year, I shot a 64 at my home course, which is St. George's on Long Island, and I didn't drive it that well, to be quite honest with you. My irons were so on, and I had great proximity to the hole. I made a ton of putts, but if I was being honest with you, I wasn't really hitting my driver squarely on the face. I just kind of managed my driver. I've had other rounds where I striped my driver and, I couldn't make a putt, but I still put up a good score. So the point of the 2/3 rule is, let's alleviate the expectation that you're going to go out on the golf course and everything's going to feel comfortable, because it will not. At minimum, one part of your game is going to be a struggle. And I believe a player of any level can shoot their best scores when 2 out of 3 of those parts of the game are going very well, and the other one's kind of a struggle. But more importantly, when we shift to like 1 out of 3 days where like 2 parts of your game are a struggle, that's where I think that's where I try and give people all of the coaching tools, picking smart targets, grit, routines, like all the things I discuss in the book to help everyone manage their game when things aren't going well. I think the 1 out of 3 days are the most typical. And my real goal for everyone is not to eliminate. I hate the word eliminate in golf. I want to mitigate or lessen the 0 out of 3 days where you just kind of like give up and you just kind of throw in the towel and nothing's going right. And it's just a train wreck. So I think most quote unquote good or okay golf can be played in that 1 out of 3 to 2 out of 3 zone, and just forget about stepping on the course and saying like, well, everything's going to go great. And the second I hit a drive out of bounds or I chunk a chip or a 3-putt, you're like, oh, here we go again. And then that's where, that negative mental loop starts and we really start to struggle. So if I can alleviate that mental burden that a lot of golfers step on the course with, like that's the messages I get. I'm like, your book has helped like remove that burden. I'm more comfortable with myself. I'm more forgiving of myself when I hit these shots because I know they're coming and it's not a surprise to me anymore. I'm not going to let them get me down. So yeah, that's the 2/3 rule in a nutshell. Is like, you just don't need to be firing on all cylinders to play your best golf.
It is such a relief, truly, to hear it. Because, we think of the game as being so hard and so difficult, and you feel like you need everything working to shoot, the low score you want to shoot that day. And being able to give yourself that leeway of saying, I'm not driving the ball well today, but my other two of the 3 is pretty good. And then being able to use that as the confidence builder, because we know how much of the game is confidence. And I think that was always what was destroying my confidence, was that if just one part wasn't working, I lumped it in with everything. So hearing that for me was an important one, that's for sure. Another thing, it's just funny, as I'm going through your book, it just feels like it's just dispelling a lot of common things we've heard forever. So, and I know, like I said, there's too much to cover in one podcast, so we're going to jump around a little bit. But the other one that just kind of jumped off the page at me was this idea. We throw this around all the time, the same verbiage where we say like a 300-yard drive is the same as a 1-foot putt on the scorecard, right? And sometimes I think a lot of stuff we just say just because we've heard it a million times and it just sounds right on the surface. And if you think about it, yeah, sure, a stroke is a stroke. But you have a very interesting way of kind of approaching this and saying that's just not the reality. And now we live in a world where strokes gained is something that is much more approachable to the everyday golfer. There's a lot of great devices and things like that can take the heavy lifting of calculating that off of us. I've used ShotScope for years. I know there's other ones out there, but tell us a little bit about why that is that 300-yard drive and that 1-foot putt technically really don't count the same when it comes to your score.
Yeah, I mean, I have to give full credit to my friend Mark Brody, who is, the inventor of the strokes gained statistic, the author of the wonderful book, Every Shot Counts, which I think is required reading for all golfers who want to get better. I've cited it many times in my book. But the concept that I grew up with was, we were, before we had access to advanced analytics and not as deep of an understanding of how scoring occurred, we were told, as junior golfers, be safe off the tee. It's all about your short game. Like all the scoring occurs inside of 100 yards. And Mark kind of flipped that on its head with his analysis, which is, it's not debatable anymore. There's no argument there. People can argue about it if they want, but I think they're just kind of wasting time in their day. Essentially what Mark found was that, the difference between golfers of all levels, 2/3 of that can be explained by your tee shots and approach shots. And approach shots are the part of the game where players separate the most. That is where scoring occurs. So your irons are technically your scoring clubs. But what you said is, we always said like, oh, that 1-foot putt is just as important as the 300-yard drive. In absolute terms, of course, that's correct. But in relative terms, and what's more important to understand about scoring, that is so far from the truth because you're never going to hit that 1-foot putt out of bounds. You're not going to top it and hit it 50 yards backwards into a bunker. The amount of damage you can inflict on your game off the tee is massive. You can lose 2 strokes right off the bat with out of bounds, and you're still not done. So I think one of the things I discuss in the book, and I try to explain some of Mark's findings in a different way, is that as you get further away from the hole, you have more of an opportunity to separate from other golfers. And a perfect example I can give is that I'm a +2 handicap. If you put me in a putting contest with a 30 handicap from 20 feet, you're not going to see much difference in our game. We're both going to 2-putt a lot. Maybe I'll make a few, maybe they'll 3-putt a few, but you're not going to be able to tell how much better I am than that golfer. If we had a chipping contest, granted, I'm not the best chipper in the world, maybe you'd start to see the difference. But as you get further away from the hole, you put us at 150 yards, I'm going to hit a ton of greens. That 30 handicap is going to be topping it, chunking it. The amount of damage they can do to their game is far different. And then you put us on the tee, I'm going to be hitting 280, 300. They're going to be topping a few. And you could say the same from a tour player and me. The further you get away from the hole, the more you can separate in your skills. And that's not to say that putting isn't important. It's incredibly important. It's just so difficult that it's harder to separate from other golfers. Like you can't outperform someone so much on the greens that's going to lead to 10 strokes in your handicap, but you can with your irons and your driver. And there's a lot of different directions we can go on this with strategy and practice and where you're putting time in your game. We don't have time for that, but that is I think a profound realization of how scoring occurs is that, the further away you get away from the hole, the more relative influence each shot has because you can do more damage or create more good on those shots. That 300-yard drive is incredible. But, a 3-foot putt, all of us are mostly going to make that. You can't separate that much from that distance.
It's so true. And you in the book, you break it down with the numbers and the strokes gain differences for the different skill levels. And I was astonished to see really how close it was in the difference in total strokes for, let's say, a 10-foot putt versus a 200-yard approach shot. It was vastly different. So I know we can't get into all aspects of it because the book goes on for multiple chapters, like we say, picking targets and things like that. But I think one question that comes up often especially when you're talking about the true recreational game, because so many of us are really limited on time. We can't get out there that much. But like I said, we want to achieve a level of play that be able to match that balance of enjoyment. There's a certain level you want to be able to play at to keep pace with your buddies or whatever it may be.
Yeah.
So how do we find the balance of how much to practice? And specifically, another thing in the book that I liked was creating this balance between the practice facility, the range, and the course. Because it's like this catch-22. Like, if we're not playing well, we're like, how can we expect to play well? We're not putting enough time on the range. Then we put a ton of time on the range and forego a little bit of time on the course. And then we get to the course. We're like, why is my game not translating from the range to the course? So what's the balance?
It's different for every player because, again, I can't. There's over 65 million golfers on the earth, and hopefully, I think that number has been growing recently, which is awesome. And everyone's got a different situation. So someone who's further along in their skill development, like me, like I don't need to practice as much as I did 15 years ago. I need to play more to keep my game sharp. But if you took a beginner, I would say, okay, we probably need to get you some swing lessons and start getting some patterns that are more functional if you have the budget for that, and maybe put in some more practice time before we get you out on the course. So everyone needs to find the balance. But I think where a lot of golfers fall into trouble is in extremes. So in the book, I talked about a few different scenarios. So there's some golfers who love to practice. They love to go to the range and beat balls. And they play maybe once or twice a month, and they're like, well, what the hell is this? You know, I was striping it on the range. I went through my bucket. Everything looked great. And now I'm on the golf course, and it's a total mess. And my answer to that problem is that a ton of learning occurs on the golf course. If you want to get better at golf, like you need to be playing enough. Like there's so many distractions and pressure, selecting targets. Like there's all these things that occur on the course that you need to deal with and learn from, and then use that feedback in your practice sessions to get better. And I do give detailed advice on how to do that in the book. So not everyone can do this perfectly, but if you can't, I want you to be at peace with it. So if you are a golfer who has time to practice, but just it's not in the cards for you to play a lot, you need to lower your expectations. If you're playing once a month, 12 times a year, I don't think that's enough to say like, oh, I want to go to a 15 handicap down to an 8. I would say that's going to be much harder unless you're some type of like athletic freak. I want people to realize the limitations they have in their life because we're not, no one does this for a living other than the pros, obviously. And then the reverse of that is, there's a player who just only plays and never practices, and they're not taking those nuggets of gold, that feedback on the course, and going to the practice facility and say, you know what, that was making me uncomfortable, that 70-yard wedge shot or my driver where I was three-putting a lot. Taking the time to put some targeted smart work on those parts of the game that make you uncomfortable, like that's how you start getting some quick wins and getting better. So the ideal situation is that we're playing enough, maybe once a week, I think is a reasonable goal for a lot of players, like 3 times a month. And then maybe you can practice 1 time a week and use the feedback that you're seeing in those rounds to make those practice sessions more efficient. Again, hard to do for everyone. I know everyone's situation is different, but just I always call it the feedback loop between playing and practicing, and using that as best you can. But if you fall into extremes in one direction, I think the game gets harder. But if I had to pick one direction, I'd rather actually people be playing more. That would be, you just can't simulate what happens in a round of golf. Like there's just so many things that occur mentally, strategically, reacting to shots. Like there's a lot of learning that goes on there. And more importantly, the reflection afterwards that I want people to do. So yeah, I'm not a range rat. I don't practice for 3 hours at a time. I maybe spend 30, 40 minutes, do my work, and then I go play.
All right, we'll get you right back to our interview with Jon Sherman in just a second, but want to take a moment to thank this week's sponsor, Titleist. And guys, the new Titleist irons have enhanced feel, improved turf interaction. They're more consistent with their look for transitions between blended sets. Speaking of which, Mike, I ended up in a recent fitting in an incredible blended set, and I don't think I've ever had a set that was more cohesive than this. My fitting experience was just incredible, and I really tested every model. You've got the T100s, T150s, T200s, even the 350s. trust me, it benefits you. Even though you may have a preconceived notion in your mind of which one is going to be best for you, it benefits you to really go out there and try them all. And the evidence of that was that I ended up in such a blended set. I've got the T150s in there, the T200s, and even threw a T350 4-iron in there, which gave me that little extra ball speed on a club that for my skill level is a little bit more difficult to hit. So I'm able to get a little bit more out of it. And, really when it comes down to is Titleist putting an emphasis on improving those 3D numbers. What we really care about, distance, dispersion, and what we recently learned about, angle of descent, how important that is, holding those greens, especially front pins. It really goes more so from just a distance club to a scoring club and putting those scoring clubs in your bag. So there's just so much out there in the T-Series lineup that you need to explore, but really the best way to do that is going and getting a fitting. So go to Titleist.com to learn more about the T-Series iron and make sure you schedule your fitting. Go out there, try them all, and see what works best for your game.
Okay, guys. Season's changing. It's getting a little cooler out. Rain is coming through. It's fall. But fall golf is one of my favorite seasons to play golf. I absolutely love it. But you got to be prepared for the elements. So check out FootJoy's new Hydro Tour lineup, their collection of outerwear. Guys, this stuff is great. It's designed to withstand the most extreme weather conditions. I mean, we've tested it pretty much with all. We're laughing because we did something fun. Well, you guys will have to wait and see. But if you're playing in places like Bandon Dunes or Cabot Links where the wind is whipping and rain is whipping, you're going to need Hydro Tour. I promise you're going to need it. It features a double collar that keeps the rain out no matter what direction it's coming in. How smart is that? It's pretty cool. It keeps you warm. It keeps you dry. It keeps you comfortable. Those are all the things you need to have fun and to play successful golf. There's also, I want to mention the Hydro Knit. So if you're playing in places like Torrey Pines or Sand Valley, you're going to need Hydro Knit. It feels like a mid-layer, but it protects like a rain jacket. It's stretchable, waterproof, breathable. And guys, for these trips, it's so easily packable. It just folds up to basically nothing. You shove it in your bag, golf bag, travel bag, whatever the case may be. Check out the entire lineup of the Hydro Tour at footjoy.com and go pick yourself up some of them today. All right, let's get back to it with Jon.
I think what has been a huge takeaway for me in reading the book is really fully understanding what the expectations are. Again, got to keep coming back to this because it's when I see it.
It's all about
paper,
it.
Right? Because I think for a perfect example might be 100 yards out and I've got a wedge in my hand. And what do I go back to? I'm thinking like the PGA Tour, and that's where I see the best golfers. And everything's a highlight reel, and everything is a foot from the hole, right? So something slips into my mind that if I'm putting my wedges to 10 to 15 feet, I'm thinking there's something wrong. This is what separates the best golfers, right? I should be on the range and just working on that. Meanwhile, foregoing other areas of my game where there's a much wider relative dispersion. I think by you putting in the book and showing that is the best of the best shots from the best golfers on their best day, by seeing the real numbers across all whatever level it is, the reality is no one's sticking it that close on a regular basis. And at that point, I'm almost chasing my tail with my practice time. And then that's when I realized, hey, a little bit more time spent on my longer approach shots, on my tee shots, is actually where my time is more wisely spent. So that's something, like you said before, we can't get into today. There's just too much here in the book, but it's the reason why I would encourage people to go and check it out, because it really was those numbers that turned a light bulb on in my mind. And it seems like I'm not even all the way through it. I'm about 3/4 of the way. It seems like you've got an endless supply of those type of those numbers, and it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, thanks to our friends at ShotScope, they gave me access to their database to show, what was the proximity for different handicap levels, and that was a real eye opener for a lot of people to say, hey, a scratch golfer is hitting it to 60 feet away, with the 7-iron in their hand. They're like, oh, wait, that's if I hit it near the green with an easy chip shot, that's actually a good shot for me. So I think showing the data and using, strokes gained and the apps like ShotScope to see the truth in your game and where you should spend your practice time more efficiently. A lot of people will see, as you said, on those longer approach shot and driver versus kind of banging away on your wedges sometimes. That's the efficient way to get to the answers quickly on how do I reduce my handicap? And you can see it clearly, you see where you're deficient, and then you can spend more time there. But yeah, I think showing people the cold hard data is so eye-opening. It's good for target selection. It's good for expectation management, and it's good for how you spend your practice time. So I'm glad you enjoyed that part of the book.
I've always been a fan of the data. I think it's been revolutionizing a lot of the equipment side of things as more regular golfers have access to things like fittings and being put in front of a launch monitor, and now we're not guessing how far we hit it or what our dispersion is.
Yep.
But being able to use that for your game itself, and again, comparing it to those expectations. Because again, just in that one example, if I'm thinking my 7-iron, I'm hitting it 60 feet from the pin every time, I need to be closer because that's what I see the guys on tour doing. The reality is no, like that's acceptable. There might be somewhere else that I need a little bit more work. So, like I said, eye-opening in a lot of ways. And Jon, appreciate you taking the time to come on the podcast today. And I would encourage anybody, go and check out the book and tell us too where they can find some of the other information about you, the podcast and things like that.
Sure. So I co-host a podcast called The Sweet Spot with another friend of mine who's also a golf coach named Adam Young. We talk a lot about practice methods, a lot of the stuff that's in the book. Adam's got amazing info too, so you can check out The Sweet Spot. My main website, Practical Golf, whenever this airs, it's relaunching in the next month or so after a couple of years of getting a new facelift and stuff like that. You can, I'm pretty active on Twitter is really my main channel. I'm glad you found me on Instagram because I actually started putting some effort in there. But you can find me anywhere at Practical Golf. The book, I wrote the book so that a golfer of any level can pick it up. There's hundreds of ideas in there. I'm only looking for you to get 2 or 3 of them that can have a meaningful impact on your game. So I wrote it for a golfer of any level. Unfortunately, it has, I'm about to cross the 60,000 copy sold mark, which is mind-blowing to me. It's just been so awesome the last year and a half, like hearing from golfers around the world who've listened to it or read it. So you can check it out. It's on Amazon. Just search for Foundations of Golf, and that's where you can find me. And appreciate you guys inviting me on and sharing a little bit of info from it.
Absolutely. We'll link to that in the show notes as well. But like I said, from that moment I came across that two-thirds rule, I said, there's something here. I need more. I'm hooked, and I appreciate it. And that's why we reached out to get you on the show. And I'm so glad to have you here. So, Jon, thank you again for everything. And we appreciate all the insight and advice.
All right, great. Thanks again.